Welcome back everyone to a new video. In this video we're going to discuss the .NET Framework and the .NET Core, illustrating some key differences between these two frameworks. Let's get started. So you might be asking yourself some questions such as, what is the .NET Core? What is the .NET Framework itself? Is .NET Framework dead already? The advantages of using .NET Core? What is ASP.NET Core? Among other questions, of course. We're going to answer these questions one by one in this video. Let's get started. So, what is the .NET Framework itself? The .NET Framework is Microsoft primary's developed platform for Windows Server and the client developers. It's a very powerful and mature framework. It's been around for about, maybe 15 years or so, with a huge class library known as the .NET Framework class library, and I'm going to discuss this in a separate video, that supports a wide variety of applications and solutions on Windows. It comes as part of the Windows operating system and is served through Windows Update, when new versions become available, or through optional standalone installers. And it can be also installed with a standalone setup downloaded from Microsoft website. It was first released in 2002. There are multiple application stacks built on top of the .NET Framework that allow developers to build different types of applications, and I guess that many of you are familiar with the Windows Forms, the Windows Presentation Foundations, the WCF or the Windows Communication Foundation, the ASP.NET Web Forms, the ASP.NET, the ASP.NET MVC, the ASP.NET Web API, the Singular R, and a few other top frameworks. Moving on to the next question, what is the .NET Core? The .NET Core is a new version of the .NET Framework, which is a cross-platform, open source, and modular .NET platform for creating modern web applications, microservices, libraries, and console applications that run everywhere, which is very important. Run everywhere, which means Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. .NET Core 1 was announced on November 2014, and it was officially released on June 2016, along with Microsoft Visual Studio 2015 Update 3, which enabled .NET Core development. With .NET Core, you can build web applications, mobile applications, desktop applications, games, and IoT, or Internet of Things applications, and we're going to discuss these in later videos. You can use three main languages as for now: C#, VB, and F#, to develop .NET Core applications. There is some key differences between the .NET Framework and the .NET Core. As we have seen in the .NET Core definitions in here, it is free, totally free. There is no any costs that you have to pay in order to start working. The programming languages, the compilers, libraries, and the runtime that make up the .NET platform are all free. There is no costs including for commercial use. The next important point is that it is open source. It is fully open source. .NET Core is available on GitHub. I will leave the link for you if you'd like to check it. The third and very important point as well, it is cross-platform, which means that you can develop on Windows, Linux, or Mac, which gives you a variety of options. Also, there is other OS ports in progress we will see in the future. .NET Core also is modular framework. .NET Core is built with a modular design, enabling applications to include only the .NET Core libraries and dependencies that are needed. Each application makes its own .NET Core versioning choices, avoiding conflicts with shared components. This approach aligns with the trend of developing software using containers technologies like Docker, for example. One thing that I'd like to mention is the smaller deployment. Even when in version 1.0, the size of .NET Core is a lot smaller than the .NET Framework. But you have to note that the overall size of the .NET Core doesn't intend to be smaller than the .NET Framework over time. Moving on to the next question, and this one is very important. Is .NET Framework dead? Let me know what you think about this, guys. As I mentioned, there is plenty of products inside of the .NET framework, such as the Windows Forms, WPF, ASP.NET Web Forms, the MVC, and others. So saying these products are dead, which means nobody uses them anymore, it's kinda not true. And as a proof for you, you can just go ahead and take a look at any of the job websites and search for companies who are using ASP.NET Web Forms or the MVC, the version 4.6 or 7, or companies using WPF, and you're going to see lots of results for companies still using these technologies. So saying that the .NET framework is dead is actually not true. And the short answer to this question is no, it's not dead yet. If you're new to this and you're confused which framework to use, or you have a company or you're working with a team and you're confused which framework should you use, let's discuss some key elements that may help you with this. So, you use .NET Framework if you are not willing to learn a new technology. .NET Framework, as I mentioned earlier, is kinda old, and many people all over the world know how to work with .NET Framework. Need a steady environment to work in. The .NET Framework is mature enough to give you a steady environment to work in, comparing to the .NET Core, which is kinda relatively new. I'm not saying that the .NET Core is not stable, but there is lots of modifications and updates needs to be done in order to be stable, the same as the .NET Framework, keeping in mind the time frame that each framework has taken. As you can see, the .NET Core is kinda new. Already have a current talented team with .NET Framework. If you already have a team and you already know how to work with the .NET Framework, and it's not going to be that easy to move on. There is a learning curve to learn the .NET Core, so maybe you would prefer to stick for a little while with the .NET Framework. Don't want to spend time with constant upgrades and the changes. As I told you, it's not the .NET Core, it's not very mature yet, and that's normal. It's not something bad. It's kind of new. Microsoft keeps updating the .NET Core, so if you don't want to spend time with constant upgrades, then you don't choose the .NET Core. If you would like to use the desktop applications using the Windows Forms and the WPF, you would prefer also the .NET Framework. Already have an existing apps developed with the .NET Framework, and this is very important point. If your company is working with an already large list of applications that you developed through the last years with the .NET Framework, so it's not going to be that easy for you and for them to move on to the .NET Core. You can do this one by one or in a steady base. When to choose the .NET Core? I'm not afraid of learning and upgrading to new things. If you're not afraid to do this, to take your time, to have some problems with your applications, it's totally fine. You can go ahead and use the .NET Core, and you will face some problems because it's a new technology. There is some differences between the .NET Core and the .NET Framework, so you might run into some troubles, but you have the time or the courage to do this, so go ahead and use the .NET Core. If you're willing to develop apps on Windows, Linux, or Mac, the cross-platform point, if this is one of your targets or your company's target, then this is going to be a good choice to use the .NET Core. I'm not scared of breaking and fixing things since ASP.NET Core is not mature enough. As I told you earlier, you can go ahead and use it. .NET Core is much faster compared to the .NET Framework. So if you're seeking the speed, .NET Core is going to be the optimum solution for you. .NET Core is far lighter, as I mentioned earlier, because it's modular. So if the size is very important to you, the same as the speed, go ahead and choose the .NET Core. If you want to work with microservices, Docker containers, these trending technologies, every company is asking for developers to know how to work with Docker containers, with microservices, and it's easier, much easier to work with these technologies using the .NET Core. So, what is the ASP.NET Core? ASP.NET Core is the high performance and modular versions of the ASP.NET, the older ASP.NET, for web developers for building high performance web apps on microservices. Remember that microservices was one of the reasons to choose .NET Core, that are deployed to the cloud or on premises. So, ASP.NET Core had a unified story for building Web UI and Web APIs. Before the ASP.NET Core, the ASP.NET MVC and the Web API was totally separated. Not totally, but they were separated. With the ASP.NET Core, they are unified. Integration of modern client-side frameworks such as JavaScript, TypeScript, Angular, and etc. It's done much easier with the ASP.NET Core. A cloud-ready environment-based configuration system is also one key factor with the ASP.NET Core. Built-in dependency injection. All of these points we're mentioning here, I'm going to create new videos about each one of this in detail. Its new lightweight and modular HTTP request pipeline, the ability to host on IIS or self-host in your own process. ASP.NET Core apps can run on .NET Core or on the full .NET framework, but only if running on top of .NET Core, the ASP.NET applications will be cross-platform. One thing that I would like to mention before we end this video is the .NET Core performance, or the new .NET performance. According to Microsoft, the new .NET framework can handle up to almost 7 million requests per second. I did not test this myself. I just got it from the official website of Microsoft, and as you can see, this number is huge comparing to the Java servlet. It's almost 2.5 million requests per second, and the Node.js, which very slow comparing to the .NET and the Java servlet. And again, I did not test these numbers myself. I just grab it from the official Microsoft website. I will also leave the links for you. Let me know if you have tested this performance thing Microsoft's talking about. I did not test it with these requests, these numbers myself. Let me know what you think about the .NET Core and the future of the .NET framework. And that's it.